May we all await the light with gladness. May our souls be still and let the season fall upon us. Let us truly understand the passage of time together. Let us share in the meaning of life.
Once again, everyone, happy Advent. Welcome to the second Sunday and the week that is to follow. Here in the home church, we have been taking an approach to Advent that is at once traditional, in other ways somewhat modern, and in some other ways entirely new. People often form into two sides on this season. Those who believe it's a time of solemnity, of embracing this time of darkness quietly, waiting silently for the coming return of the light to come, and those who wish to celebrate, who come for the lights, for the loud singing, the laughter, the parades, the feasts, and the parties. Sometimes those engaged in the latter feel a certain guilt or a certain feeling of missed opportunity, perhaps, for lacking in quietude. Sometimes those engaged in the former feel in that quietude a longing for fellowship with others, for lights, for song, for release at the end of a perhaps long and difficult year. But I would argue that's because we need both, and we need both desperately. We want to encourage everyone to embrace and explore both sides of Advent, to experience both of them during this time, even if we don't strike a perfect 50-50 balance between the two. No one ever achieves a perfect balance like that. That's okay. But there's another way to look at this season, as we mentioned last week, not just as Advent, but as adventure. As my good friend informed me right before this season began, the Latin adventura means prior to the arrival. Every adventure involves anticipating the coming of something more than yourself, something that comes from beyond the ordinary. That's how we should approach this season, by living it fully like the adventurers that we are.
The second light of Advent is the light of plants, plants that reach up to the sun and in the breezes dance. The light of plants is a light of growth and transformation. The fact that our earth is covered in these life, air, shelter, food-giving beings is one of those everyday facts of existence that it's easy to overlook, but one that sometimes strikes me with its hugeness, its miraculousness. And the way plants do this is by literally changing light to substance and food in their cells. It's kind of mind-blowing, and it's happening all the time, all around us, sustaining us. With minerals, like we said last week, we share basic being, solid existence. But with plants, we share the ability to grow, to change and transform, to respond to stimulus. Plants aren't simply passively taking the light in, they reach for it and they respond to it. In Stephen Mitchell's book, The First Christmas, he talks about the nativity story from the point of view of different characters: the shepherds, the wise men, even the ox in the stable. Mary's chapter is incredibly moving. He describes the Annunciation, the visitation of the angel who tells her that she, a virgin, is pregnant and will bear the Messiah, not just any baby. In this chapter, he describes Mary's encounter with the light of the angel who visits her, and also her response. Now remember, not only would Mary have been quite young, but this pregnancy put her at odds with her entire society, even potentially with her husband-to-be. It was something unexplainable to anyone, something no one could possibly understand. Absolutely terrifying. Not to mention that the road to come would involve the journey of the pregnancy itself, long periods of darkness, pain, discomfort, and uncertainty waiting for the coming of the child. But Mary had a sense of what was to come. Mary had a sense of the way God works, the way that sacred light moves in this world. Usually we simplify this by calling it faith, but it's really that and much more. Mary had to surrender to what was to come, to accept that growth happens in the darkness and without certainty. Instead of shrinking from it, Mary said yes to it. She alone in tune with the divine, reached toward the light of God. We, like plants who reach for the sun, and Mary who reached for this holy light, can reach toward spirit for our own transformation.
Last week, for the first Sunday, we focused on minerals. People often do. In walking upon the earth, we literally walk upon the rocks and the minerals, that entire world of stone. We use them to build our houses, our roads, cars, even our phones. If we think about it, it's more or less impossible to extricate ourselves from this side of the world. Likewise, next week, we will focus on animals, and the following, we'll look at humans themselves. The animal world is more or less the world of society. It's the world of being biological, sentient beings. And humans are us. But this week is different. Plants are different. Not in the sense that we can actually extricate ourselves from the world of plants. Of course, we cannot. It's just that we don't think about plants as much as we think about these other things. And even more so, we don't think like the plants very often. We are less conscious of the plant type growth. Nonetheless, despite our animal status, yet occurs within and among us, just as all of the other forms. It's not linear. It's not a straight line. It's more like cycles and spirals. It's entire seasons in which the growth must take place silently and underground. It's communications that occur through networks of mycelium in the forest floor, and not through bellows and roars and speeches. It's growth that happens in different ways in different years, perhaps first sleeping, and then creeping, and then leaping. We have all of this within us, just as much as it is part of the plant world. It's all the same world. We carry this with us. This is part of how we work. And in the same way, even in religious traditions that focus on the masculine, we have the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. We don't usually call the Holy Spirit a man, but it's definitely not a woman, typically, I think, in most people's minds. We nonetheless have seen over the centuries, of course, very obviously, the emergence of the divine feminine anyway. In this case, it takes the form of the Holy Mother, Mary, because it is in and through her story of fear, vulnerability, faith, openness, acceptance, surrender to the promises to come, this utterly human story, that the light is able to be birthed back into the world. Her story is our story, just as much as within us is contained the rhythms of the plants.
Last week, I said that the Christmas story isn't just about a birth, but it is about a birth, and that's also important. The creation of something brand new, the transformation of woman into mother, seed into fruit, love into flesh. It requires surrender, trust, faith. Not in one single moment of realization or attainment, but something that requires actually living out this transformation over time and even in the dark. It requires us to say yes to waiting, to say yes to what is to come, to say yes to doing whatever it takes to transform the thorns that we see all around us to the roses that we know will blossom.
And whether we're celebrating or we're contemplating in the next few days and in the next few weeks, and we should absolutely do both, if you ask me, we are oriented during this season toward this coming of the light. We would do well to acknowledge and celebrate and ponder how this happens, not as a sudden flash, not as an instant of manifestation that comes out of nowhere, but as a birth. And birth is a process. And it starts at that moment of true beginning, when nothing exists, when darkness is greatest. It doesn't appear dramatically carrying a sword, ready to take care of business. Instead, the light grows slowly in the darkness, and it's only when it's nearing its moment of triumph that we realize how far it has come and how long it has truly been alongside us. Birth is a phenomenon of animals and people, yes, but this type of growth, slow and hidden, cyclical and process-oriented, requiring patience, requiring faith in things that we cannot see necessarily on the moment-to-moment basis, this is handed down to us from that world of plants, in which seeds grow in the ground and often take years before their fruits are ultimately consumed. That's how life is. So it is with us. So it is with the light of the world. Let's welcome it in, but let's welcome its arrival in its own way. Not necessarily the way that we would choose, certainly not as easy as the way we would want it to be. Twists and turns and surprises, sometimes, often, slowness, sometimes it feels like it borders on dormancy. But the process continues, birth being inevitable, and the light returns to give us the shine that is our destiny in this life and perhaps beyond. That's what we talked about for the second Sunday of Advent. We'll be back on this Sunday, the 11th, talking about, as we mentioned, the world of animals, which we will, in this case, extrapolate to be applied to our world, society, the times that we live in, and the continued relevance and indeed reoccurrence of this Advent story and how it applies just as much today as in first century Palestine. We hope to see you then, and we'll make another video like this as well. Happy Advent.